Hello, fellow translators. So today I'm going to talk about something that I feel like talking about because it's my channel and I can talk about whatever I want to on my channel. So there you go. And this is literature and translation. It's something that I'm interested in, and I realize it's not what I do. I don't do literature translation. It's something I do want to get into though, and so that's why I'm also interested in it. Also, I realize almost all the books I read are translated books. For some reason, I really like translated literature. And I read quite a bit. I mentioned this before, like about 150 books per year. Feel free to add me on Goodreads, by the way, where I talk a bit more about everything I read. But anyway, today I want to talk about a little bit about some of the books that I've read recently in translation, and hopefully I can get into a bit why I like them. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly, though, because I feel like otherwise I'll take a long time. The first one, I mentioned this a bit briefly before. It's by Pedro Lenz. It's called La Bella Fanny. Which I realize actually in English would sound pretty bad. So they might have to come up with a different name in English. But because it sounds, when you say it in Italian or Swiss German, which is how it was originally written, it just sounds like kind of an exotic name. But anyway, obviously it has bad meanings in English. But either way, this was written originally in Swiss German, actually in Bern German, Berndeutsch, and was translated directly into Italian. I mentioned this briefly in one of the other videos. I thought it was interesting because it's very rare to have something translated from Berndeutsch, from Swiss German, directly into Italian. Usually you have to translate it first into High German and then into other languages. So I thought it was interesting. I went to this guy's talk, and the translator was also there, Amalia Urbano, and I got to talk to her a little bit about it. And in fact, she also signed the book, which I appreciated, and the author did it as well. But anyway, this was an interesting book to me. It was about, as far as I know, it's out in German and Italian for now, not in English, at least not yet. But it talks. There's a whole story about this lady Fanny, who all the guys seem into, but then at the end there's sort of a little twist, sort of. But mostly it talks about life in Bern, living in Bern. About the there's a lot of, it's written in Berndeutsch, so a lot of the slang and all that, which is very hard to translate. I thought she did an excellent job of doing it, but not exaggerating it with the slang and with all that, but kind of getting a feel that these are some guys hanging out in bars and going out to eat a bit too drunk around Bern. And so yeah, and that's the thing that I really like about work in translation, is that it helps you enter these different worlds that you otherwise wouldn't read about if you only read stuff that was originally in your language. Anything that's been translated was originally written in another language, for another audience, like a different country, a different world, of different people that are used to something different. So I kind of like entering into that world through the translation. And you really get to do it with this book. I'm doing this whole video in English, but as far as I know, for now, it's only available in Italian and German, and Swiss German, obviously the original. So unless you know those languages, I don't know if you can read much about it. This guy, Pedro Lenz, he's written other books, though, as well. He's Swiss German, but you can tell by the name Pedro, I think his mother was Spanish, and then he also spoke some Italian. Like the whole book signing thing he did was in Italian, and so he and his Italian was pretty good. It was okay. It was, but anyway, so that was interesting. So anyway, I'll get off of that because chances are most of you guys won't read it. This is another interesting book that I thought. Let me go straight to a book which you might read actually. This was an excellent book. I knew nothing about it, and I kind of don't want to say anything about it. And I just, for some reason, I had on my wish list. It was available cheap somewhere. I think I ordered it online, and so I got it used. I thought it was an excellent book by, I don't know how to pronounce that, so I probably shouldn't even try. Says Noteboom, something like that. Originally written in Dutch, translated to English, called The Following Story. This was one of my favorite books of the year. It was probably one of the few 5 stars. I very rarely give 5 stars on Goodreads, but this was one of them. And I have, I think, all his other books on my wish list now because I want to read more. But it's, and I really wish they would put the translator in the front thing. But anyway, translated from the Dutch by Inarike. For any of you Dutch translators, I don't know if that means anything, but I thought it was done excellently. It flowed very well. Obviously, I didn't read the original Dutch, but it was a very interesting story. I'm really trying to talk about it without saying too much about the story. But it's And I was actually going to give up on it close to halfway through. It sounded like it was meandering and I didn't know what was going on, but it turned out to be good. It's a short book, so I would recommend sticking with it. And it talks a lot, again, it takes place in the Netherlands, and this guy's kind of talking about his life there in the Netherlands, which is a different world for me that I don't know much about. So there you go. Ses no te boom, the following story, I highly recommend. The next book by Kaho Nashiki, Un'estate con la strega dell'Ovest. So when I was in Italy, I was there last month. I noticed how much Japanese literature there is in translation. I knew Banano Yoshimoto was big. Haruki Murakami is big everywhere. But there were so many other books. Yukio Mishima is big. I knew that as well. But there's so many more books that translated into Italian. So first of all, Banano Yoshimoto, I think all her works have been translated to Italian. Not all of them have been translated to English. I don't even know if Kaho Nashiki's book, Nashiki Kaho, however, has been translated into English or not. But it's called A Summer with the La Strega dell'Ovest, the West, the Witch of the West. It's quite interesting. It talks about living in the countryside. It's weird because it reminded me of visiting my grandmother in the countryside in Tuscany, which has nothing to do with this, which is in the countryside of Japan. But it's interesting because the narrator is a girl and her grandmother is the one she visits. The grandmother is actually British, who married a Japanese guy, and her husband passed away, but she's obviously has been living in Japan for a long time, and but has these quirks and things about her, and just talks about the visits and all that. I thought it was a very cute book and a kind of nostalgic book, even if something I don't have nostalgia for. It had that feel to it, and I enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, I was very amazed also at how much Japanese work in translation is there in Italy, and also Korean. There's growing more. I knew Hong Kong had been translated, although I was told that they don't have translators that translate from Korean directly into Italian, so they'd always do it via the English, which seems like a mess to me. I wonder how it is for all the Japanese, though. If any of you translate from Korean or Japanese into Italian, I think this is a huge opportunity to get into. And then finally, the next book I want to mention was an odd book, San Gallo d'Italia, Sant Gallen und Italien. And the only reason I mentioned it was so I got this at the Abbey in St. Gallen. If you've been to St. Gallen, which you probably haven't been to, but if you do go there, you'll probably visit this Abbey, which is an awesome Abbey, a huge, like from the 1200s. It was basically a library full of books, and you can go into it. You have to get these weird kind of slippers that you put over your shoes whenever you go there because all the floors are old. And here's a picture of the shoes you have to get. And the book basically takes all the literature you have about Italy in St. Gallen or St. Gallen in Italy. And I just thought it would be interesting to see because I was in St. Gallen and I'm Italian, half Italian, so I thought it would be interesting. It's done very weirdly, though, because half the articles are written in Italian, half in German. The ones in German then have a summary at the end in Italian. The ones in Italian then have a summary in the end of German. But it's it's kind of odd the way it's written. But it's still literature and translation. It's not really literature. Well, yeah, it's literature and translation. Actually, it had quite a few interesting things about old writings and people who'd stayed there and or from St. Gallen who'd traveled down to Italy, and some interesting anecdotes. If you pass by the Abbey in St. Gallen, if you're in St. Gallen, definitely pass by the Abbey. If you're passed by the Abbey, get this if you speak one of those two languages. Otherwise, they probably don't have it available. I'm realizing now as I'm saying this that I should probably choose more stuff that's been translated into English. But anyway, that's pretty much it now for literature and translation. So what I want to do, actually, what I'd like to do is do more of these, talk about literature and translation, because I read so much about it and I find it interesting. Note to self, do ones that have been translated into English from now on, since I make my videos in English. It makes more sense. So it's stuff you might actually be able to read. But yeah, so I might be doing more of these because, once again, it's my channel. I get to do what I want. And that's pretty much it. But hopefully you did find this fun or useful or something. What I can do is I can put links to these books in the description in case you're interested in any of them, because you never know. Since I'm doing this in English, once again, I do recommend that. So please let me know if you read it. But if you speak Italian, feel free to look into these other ones or any of the other languages that they're written in. because I enjoyed these as well in their own ways. Like this one, I mean, yeah, like because this one was weird, but anyway, it had interesting stuff that was interesting to talk about, like about the different. Here, I'll go through one because why not? They talked about this guy, this Italian who'd stayed at the Abbey, and he was basically pretending to be a paralyzed person because paralyzed people got free baths and free care at the Abbey at the time, and so but when they drew his bath, it was really hot. And so he was Italian though, and so he was saying, you know, in kind of Italian Latin, this is back in the 1200s too, he's like, caldest, caldet, like è caldo, it means it's hot, you know, calde est, sort of Latin-y, caldest. But the lady pouring the water spoke German, so she understood kalt est, which means it's cold. And so she kept putting more boiling water until the guy, pretending to be a paralytic, jumped up out of the bath and ran out. And anyway, so a few little interesting stories like that of stuff lost in translation. But yeah, anyway, I've talked enough about this. Literature translation might be something that's coming up soon if I feel like talking about this stuff more. But hopefully you found it somewhat interesting, and I will talk to you in the next video. Okay, thanks. Bye. Savedum.